So today we're going to make the ultimate survival food, pemmican. The Native Americans in this country made it for a lot of years, and this is what got them through the winters, the long trips, and when the white people came over, they were trading this with them for different things. So we're going to make it out of 3 simple ingredients: beef fat, lean red meat, and blueberries. It's going to be 1 part fat, 1 part red meat, 1 part blueberries. So a pound, and a pound. You want one of the leanest cuts that you can get. We're using top round beef. You can make this out of any red meat, whether it be elk or caribou or cow. They'll all work, but you want really lean meat for this process. First thing we're going to do is dry everything out, and we're going to start with the blueberries, and we'll get them in the dehydrator. So 7 quarts of blueberries is just going to fill this 5-layer dehydrator. You want to make sure they're all flattened out. You don't have them double stacked. If you can get an even amount of space between them, that's even better. As they start dehydrating, they'll shrink and we can move them around then. Get the last one in place. So we're going to cut all the fat off this top round, slice it up in between all the layers, and get everything off in it. Because when we dehydrate this, we want to have clear meat, no fat on it whatsoever. We want to put it in the dehydrator and get this extra dry. Just remember, we're not making chewy beef jerky, we're making crispy meat sticks. Once this is dehydrated, we're going to put it in a food processor and grind it up into powder. The first thing we'll do is start by taking off all the fat on this top round. You're going to want a good sharp knife for this. Try to leave as much meat on it as you can. Just take it off in layers. So we got that outer layer of fat off. Now we're going to separate in between the membrane layer. We'll open that right up. And we'll try to get off as much of the silver skin as we can. And we're going to save all this fat all the way through. We just don't want it in the dehydration process. You can see here we still got some fat on that meat, but we'll still put it in there, and we'll show you. That's going to make a nice little treat later on when we go to boil that fat down to make the tallow to help preserve this. So the tallow is actually going to encapsulate this meat and keep all the water from getting into it. So now we got one portion of it into a nice little thin sheet, and we've got most all the fat off the best we could. We can pick a few more little pieces if we want to here. The more fat you can get off, the better, because it doesn't dry at the same rate as the meat does. So yeah, Now that we've got that one ready, we're going to start slicing in really thin layers. Now we're going to put that meat directly into the dehydrator. So we're just trying to make nice thin strips, keep them all about the same thickness to the best of your ability, and that will help them dry evenly. There's our first layer all filled in, and we'll put this tray down directly to the bottom, and we'll just keep filling as we go. Try to get them in there so they're just barely touching, but not quite. And as the water evaporates out, they'll get a little bit more drying space between each one of them. So now we're going to cheat and use the meat slicer because we've got such a great big piece. This will come in handy for what we're doing. Now it's small enough, we'll switch back and save my fingers. And so I've only got so much dehydrator space, so these short little pieces I like doing in my dehydrator. And all this shaved steak that I just took off in these great big sheets, I'll actually put these in the oven and dehydrate them in there at about 125 degrees. But I'll start off at 165 just to kill off anything that might be in there, and then bring it back down to 125 so it can slowly dehydrate. Now we'll put them larger sheets right into the oven. It's alright if it hangs down over a little. I got all the racks spaced out, so if it hangs down, well, they still won't be touching. And when we put this in the oven, we want to try to keep it open just a little bit, so as that heats up and starts to dehydrate, all that moisture can come right out. And probably going to be in the 10 to 12 hour range cooking like this. So we're going to make a little bit of tallow, which is just the trimmings that we took off. Pretty much all we're going to do is boil it down, strain out the meat pieces, make a tasty little treat out of them. Clean it up some more, strain it, let it cool, and it'll be a nice white, lard looking, or lard's pig, but this will be tallow. So if you buy renderings from a butcher, they'll probably call this suet. A lot of this isn't going to make very good tallow. The silver skin really doesn't work, but I'm going to get what I can get out of it, and just so we don't waste it. But the beef, once it's cooked in this tallow, makes a really good, they call it crackling. It'll be extra cooked little pieces of meat. So we'll boil all that off, let the fat melt, separate it. You want to cook this relatively low. This thing will go down to 200, so I'm going to try this. This is the first time I've ever used one of these to try it, but it's such a small batch, and it's not good clean lard or fat like you get from a butcher, so I don't want to mix this in with the actual batch of tallow that we're going to make. You really want to get leaf lard from a butcher if you can, or good clean cuts of fat, especially around the ribeye area. We'll make what we can make out of this, and that's it. So we're finishing up the last bit of dehydration now on the preparation to make our pemmican. And I've been going through the dehydrator as it goes. And I've got one bucket of beef all broken up. But you want to keep checking it as it comes down to the end. And you want to try breaking it. If it doesn't break and stays together, it's not dry enough for what we're going to do in this process. So we'll put it back in. I'm down to the last little bit now. The berries are almost done. They've been probably 24 hours now in this dehydrator. It's pretty slow. I think I'm going to take them out and put them in the oven here shortly just to get that last little bit. But now that these two are almost set, now we need to start on our suet mix. So if you go to your butcher shop and ask for a suet, you are going to get the fat that comes from around the internal organs of a cow. You don't want anything but a cow for what we're doing here. So what you're going to want to do is take this out, chunk it all up, boil it down. We'll walk through the process. But if you go to get your fat from a butcher, it should look kind of like the face of a moon. All kind of little leaves in there and craters. If it's one solid mass, you probably don't quite have the fat that you want. You really want this internal organ fat. We'll chunk this up in half, 3/4 to an inch section. If you can get it ground from your butcher, that'd be even better. It processes up. So all our fruits and meat are all dried out now. Now we can keep going and processing them up, weigh it out, and find out what we got while our fat's still boiling down. We've been stirring that every 5 minutes or so just to keep it so it don't burn on the bottom, because you definitely don't want that burn flavor in your tallow when you're done. You want a nice snow white. So I didn't have enough blueberries, so I'm gonna go with goji berries, which happen to be in like the top 3 superfoods along with blueberries. So these are all dried out. I dried them out a little bit extra in the oven along with finishing the blueberries off. If you don't happen to have a food processor, we can always take these berries and put them in a mortar pesto and grind them up, but we don't have to do that. We'll get a food processor. Is that batch. So we want these mostly ground, not quite a powder, but almost a powder. We'll keep going. You really want these ground up fairly well, and if they're a powder, so be it. It's better than having too big of chunks. I think that's pretty good there. So as we go through all this, we want to weigh it out. We get our little scale here, get it all zeroed out. got 5 ounces right on the money. So we'll write that down in our book and we'll add these up as we go through. Just mix it up a little bit, make sure there's no big clumps left in there. I'm going to use this kettle to mix everything up in. Put it in there. Now we'll grab the blueberries out of the oven and start processing them up. Get rid of that pan, that one's a little hot. I think we got it that time. Five and a half ounces that time. So I tried speeding the process along and we kind of burnt up some blueberries. So to get us up to a pound, we added some boabab powder and moringa powder, both of which might not like long-term preserving, but we're going to eat all this up this summer. I just need it to last a week unrefrigerated and it'll do that. So we'll get on to processing some beef now. So you can see this isn't pulverized, it's kind of like more like a shredded beef. You can go further if you'd like, but that's as far as we're going to go with it. We got 10 ounces. So a little bonus footage today, we'll show making some dog food for little Layla. We talked earlier about the crackling that we made for her. We're just going to put that in the food processor, and crackling is just simply the fat, the bits of meat that we cut off, the silver skin yesterday, and it's just boiled in its own fat pretty much. So we'll give that to her. She's gonna love it. Actually, she won't even know she's got it, but I don't like to feed her a ton of human food, so we'll hide it on her in her dog food. We'll also take some of these wonderful blueberries that we burnt, put some of them in. And if I didn't tell you, I burnt a few goji berries too, so we'll give Layla some goji berries. Probably have to make a couple batches here. We're pretty much full. It's a halfway decent little mix right there for her. Still a lot of nutrients left in this food. The meat's too tough, I don't want to eat it. The blueberries are burnt, charcoal tasting, same with the goji berries. The charcoal's good for bugs and parasites too, so everybody wins on this one. without the fat, it really looks like, you know, that's our pemmican mix. It looks just like that, all ground up and blended. So we'll make one more little batch for her. Here, there's our second little batch. We'll see if little Layla likes it. Come here, little Layla. Come here. Guess it's good enough for a dog. We might be onto something. Dog trail pemmican. So most of it's rendered down. It's starting to get pretty late in the night, so I'm going to take out what I can, strain it out. I've got a nice stainless steel bowl, a fine meshed screen, and some cheesecloth. So I've got that nested right down in the bottom. And I'm going to ladle out what I can. So I've got all of it put in here, and just let that last little bit strain out. Maybe we'll help it along and push it a little bit here. I don't need to get all of it because it's going to go back in the pot and keep rendling down. Just wanted to get out what we could. So we've got the last little bit hanging in our cheesecloth here, and we're just going to let that drip until it's done dripping. You can see the first initial batch we made. It's turning out nice and white right now. That's cooled up pretty good. And as you can see, out of that 4 pounds we had, it's probably half the size of my fist of unusable material. So we got the bulk of it. We did pretty good. You can't always get it all, but we'll drain this last little bit out. I had to bake it at a lot higher temperature, so I don't think it's quite as good. I won't use this stuff for my pemmican, but we'll be saving this for greasing pans and doing other sort of cooking activities. This is still really useful stuff. As you can see, I also had to, the last little bit, I used the emulsion blender, get that last little bit broke up, and heated it on high to get them last bits broke down. So we've got our tallow all processed up. I drained out the extra last night in that last little batch, and I probably got about this much. I've just warmed it up in the oven, and we're going to transfer it over into this. You want to make sure your jar is still good and hot from sterilization, because if you dump this hot liquid into it, it will crack. So we'll set this one aside. This one's not going to be used in our pemmican. This one we'll use for cooking and greasing up our cast iron pans. We'll set that aside to cool. What we are going to use for our 3.5 pounds of pemmican mix that we made, we are going to use 1 3/4 or 1 1 pound 12 ounce of this nice clear rendered tallow. So we'll get some measured out right now. Thought I had a spot of water in there. You definitely don't want water in this at this point. I like doing it when it's hard right now. It gives us a good way to measure it. We want to make sure we have enough to work with. This 112, and I'll give it just a little extra because all the moringa powder and everything that we would put in there, it may suck it up a little bit more. So there's 1 pound 13.5 ounces. So, and then that's what we got left over from roughly 4 pounds-ish of suet that we bought. So I'm going to take this and transfer it to this warm bowl that we have. I'm going to wipe it out first because there's just a little bit of sediment left from the last batch that I made. And we'll get that put in the oven. We'll get this melted so it's not liquid, but somewhere halfway in between so it's pliable and we can work with it. And then I'm also going to get this one thrown in the oven. We'll melt this down so we can put it in a good, clean, sterilized mason jar. And that'll keep for a long time now. So that one will go in the oven. We'll get this cleaned out, we'll get this put in the oven, and then we'll be back and mix everything up. So we got a disinfected, super dry mason jar. After we disinfected these, I actually ran them through the microwave for about 3 minutes just to make sure there's absolutely no water in here. Once we dump the tallow in here, you don't want any water whatsoever. So this jar is good and hot. We'll get this put in here while our other batch is firming up a little bit. I had to put that in the oven too to get it to start melting up. So we'll start mixing our fat in with our tallow. I'll start off with a spoon and just start mixing it all up, and then I'll actually dive in there with my clean hands. Our tallow here is soft, but still somewhat hard. Be careful not to get any of that tallow dirty because I don't know how much it's going to take, and any extra we'll put back in a jar. But we'll just start mixing this up. We'll keep drawing this fat out. It's still somewhat soft, but it's getting harder as we work with it. But we want to add enough to coat all this so it just barely sticks together like good sand at the beach. I think definitely with all that extra powder we added in, it's going to take all of what we prepared. Hopefully, glad we got a little bit extra. Get all that tallow scooped in there. spoon cleaned off now. Now I'm just going to start mixing it by hand. Now make sure this is mixed really good and everything's covered in a layer of fat, because that's what's going to seal out the oxygen and the moisture from getting in all that dry powder. You want to go the least amount you can, because if you go too excessive, you're going to have a really fatty meat bar. I'll keep mixing and we'll be back in a few minutes when we go to spread this on a sheet. So the tallow all mixed in with our pemmican base, and while you were away, we actually mixed in a little bit of blackstrap molasses for taste. Not a lot, probably 4 or 5 big spoonfuls, just to sweeten it up some. Now we're going to take it out and put it on a piece of parchment paper and roll it out. Put another piece on top of it, and take my wife's rolling pin, kind of like that. Take a peek and see what we got. Take a little knife, and I'm just going to square it up now, so when we go to package it, it's a little cleaner. Kind of watching the bubbles flow out of the parchment paper, and when they're all gone, we know we're nice and flat. See, we got bars that are about roughly 5/8 of an inch thick. So we'll let these harden up, and then we'll cut them and package them up. Now this is all hardened up somewhat. We'll cut it up and vacuum package it. So I went through and measured already, and these are going to be roughly 4 by 3. This is just a cheap little pizza cutter. Quarter pound, 4 ounces. So we'll figure out what size bag it's going to take to get 4 of these, because there's 4 of us usually all together, so we'll get 4 per bag, and that'll So that just put a little seal on one end of our bag, so now we can stuff it full and we'll vacuum it up. Make sure there's no residue in there to affect that seal when we put it in. And there's lunch, breakfast, or dinner, all vacuum sealed and ready to go. I'll throw these in the freezer until we need them next summer, just in case the recipe didn't turn out quite right and stabilized it, so we'll just continue on. So we get everything packaged up now, and before we put these out in the freezer, I'm going to write Pemmican 12, 20, 20. It's hard to tell what you might find out in the freezer, and you never know when. So we ended up with 5.5 pounds, a little over, but we started out with 12 pounds of beef, a dried pound of blueberries and goji berries and moringa powder and some other stuff, and about 4 pounds of raw suet that we melted down, and we ended up left over, and these are cool enough to the touch, so we'll just close them up and package them away. Couple afternoons worth of work, and that's what we ended up with. Enough food for 4 days for one person, maybe a little bit more, but that's it. Thank you.